The alien scouts descended through the thick canopy, their sleek, metallic armor glinting beneath shafts of sunlight that broke through the dense jungle. Commander Zaltor stood at the front of the small scouting party, his scaled face twisted into a smirk. Earth. Primitive. Backward. He had seen the reports, humans using sticks and stones, hiding in trees. How quaint. This would be over quickly, and they would be back on their ships before the day was out. Commander. His second-in-command, Hark, approached, his reptilian eyes narrowing as they scanned the tree line. Scanners detect minimal life signs. No threat worth noting. Zaltor chuckled, his voice a low growl. Of course. These creatures barely qualify as sentient. Let's begin our sweep. The group of scouts moved forward, their footsteps unnaturally quiet thanks to their advanced suits. But as they delved deeper into the forest, something changed. The air felt heavier, as if the jungle itself were alive, watching them. Zaltor noticed it too but dismissed the feeling. This was Earth, an inferior planet with an even more inferior species. Still, something prickled at the back of his mind. Above them, hidden in the high branches, Captain Hayes crouched, completely still. His camouflaged suit blended seamlessly with the bark, making him nearly invisible to the naked eye. His team was in position, scattered across the trees, their bows drawn, arrows notched, ready. They had trained for years in this terrain, honing skills that had been passed down for generations. To the aliens, they would look like relics of the past, but Hayes knew better. The forest was their weapon, and today, the invaders would learn just how wrong they were to underestimate it. They're moving in, just like we thought, Hayes whispered into his headset, his voice low and calm. Wait for my signal. From below, the aliens continued their advance, their sophisticated technology scanning for any sign of human presence. But the dense foliage confused their systems, rendering their sensors almost useless. Zaltor growled in frustration as his visor flickered, struggling to adjust to the thick jungle air. Hark stepped forward, raising his hand to signal a halt. Commander, we should recalibrate the systems. The interference. Continue the sweep? Zaltor snapped, waving him off. These are simple humans. Don't let a few trees scare you. Hayes' eyes flicked to the side, watching as one of his men, Mason, adjusted his position on a nearby branch. He was young but steady, the best shot in their unit. Hayes gave a slight nod. It was time. He exhaled slowly. Now. The first arrow flew soundlessly through the air, piercing the helmet of an alien soldier before the others even had time to react. He crumpled silently to the ground, and the jungle remained still. The alien squad froze, their heads snapping up to the trees in confusion. Ambush! Hark barked, reaching for his weapon. But it was too late. A second arrow whizzed through the air, followed by a third, each one striking true. The aliens scrambled, firing blindly into the trees, but their energy blasts only lit up the thick leaves and vines, doing nothing to reveal their attackers. Zaltor, now fully aware that they had walked into a trap, growled in rage. Regroup! Fall back! We need to get out of this cursed forest. But the jungle had already swallowed them whole. Hayes signaled to his team, moving swiftly and silently through the branches. The aliens were disoriented, their high-tech equipment useless in this environment. It was exactly as they had planned. From his new vantage point, Hayes could see the desperation in Zaltor's movements. The once arrogant commander was now barking orders with a shaky edge in his voice, fear creeping into his eyes. He was no longer in control. The humans were. Another volley of arrows rained down, and more alien soldiers fell. The rest attempted to retreat, but the forest offered no clear path. Vines tangled around their feet, and every step seemed to lead them deeper into confusion. Panic set in. We need air support! Hark shouted into his communicator, but the static in his earpiece told him all he needed to know: their signals were being jammed. What is happening? Hayes smiled grimly from his perch. They had taken down one of the aliens' drones earlier, reverse engineering it just enough to disrupt their communications. The aliens might have superior technology, but here, in the heart of the jungle, human ingenuity reigned supreme. Zaltor stumbled, his foot caught in a thick root as he tried to retreat. His once pristine armor was now streaked with mud, and the confidence that had defined his every step was gone. He looked up, catching a glimpse of movement in the trees, a shadow, barely discernible, but it was enough to remind him that they were being hunted. "Regroup!" he shouted again, but his voice carried no authority now, only desperation. Hayes' voice crackled over his headset. "Mason, finish it!" From across the way, Mason adjusted his aim, his arrow poised and ready. In one swift motion, he let it fly. The arrow cut through the air, striking Zaltor in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The commander gasped, clutching at the wound, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The forest grew silent once more, the remaining alien scouts frozen in fear, their commander at the mercy of the humans they had mocked just moments before. Hayes descended from the tree, his boots landing softly on the forest floor. He approached the fallen alien, his face unreadable as he looked down at the once proud commander. "You should have stayed on your ship," Hayes said quietly, his voice calm but laced with cold finality. Zaltor struggled to speak, his mouth opening and closing in disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were the superior force. They had the better technology. Hayes crouched down beside him, his eyes hard. "Welcome to Earth." With that, he stood, leaving the commander to his fate as the jungle, quiet and impenetrable, closed in around them once again. The forest was eerily quiet, the sounds of battle now a distant memory. Commander Zaltor's breathing was shallow, each gasp a reminder of the arrow lodged in his shoulder. He lay motionless, half-conscious, listening to the soft rustle of leaves above. His thoughts were a muddle of disbelief and rage. How could this have happened? His forces, superior, equipped with the finest technology, had been reduced to scattered remnants. By humans. Not far away, Captain Hayes crouched low, observing the remaining alien scouts as they regrouped, their movements slow and hesitant. The hunters had the advantage now, but Hayes knew that arrogance was their enemy. These aliens, as disoriented as they were, could still be dangerous if pushed too hard. "We've got them pinned, Captain." Mason's voice crackled softly through the earpiece. He was perched in the same high branch where he had taken his last shot, his calm demeanor unchanged. "Do we take the rest?" Hayes didn't respond immediately. His eyes flicked across the clearing, watching the aliens fumble with their malfunctioning gear, the strain of panic now visible in their hurried gestures. But something nagged at him. These invaders were too quiet. Too focused. "Hold fire," he whispered back. "They're planning something." A sudden high-pitched sound split the air, jarring and unnatural. One of the remaining alien soldiers had activated a device, its sharp frequency designed to disorient. Hayes winced as the noise surged, pressing his hand to his ear to block out the shrill tones. His vision blurred for a moment, and he could feel the world spinning slightly. Even Mason let out a low groan of discomfort through the comms. But then, just as quickly as it had started, the noise stopped. Hayes blinked, trying to clear the dizziness from his mind. His vision steadied, and the forest returned to its quiet, watchful state. But something was different. The scouts had vanished. The clearing, once filled with the sounds of scrambling alien soldiers, was now empty. "They've gone invisible," Hayes muttered to himself, scanning the area. He adjusted his visor, switching to thermal. The trees around him glowed softly in various shades of red and orange, but there were no signs of the scouts. They had vanished without a trace. "Captain, I don't see them." Mason's voice came again, laced with frustration. "What the hell did they do?" "They're still here," Hayes replied, his voice low and deliberate. "They've just changed tactics." The tension in the air was palpable now. The alien soldiers, once stumbling and panicked, had regained their composure. Their technology was still a threat, and their knowledge of cloaking and subterfuge, clearly underestimated by Hayes, was proving dangerous. He clenched his jaw, knowing that they had to shift their approach quickly. "Team, listen up," he whispered into the comm. "We need to draw them out. Thermal isn't working. But they still have to move. They're not ghosts, track the sounds. They're somewhere in the underbrush. The hunters, scattered across the forest, silently repositioned. The air was still, charged with anticipation, the quiet hum of nature now replaced by the pounding of hearts. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, heightened their awareness. They were no longer hunting, they were being hunted, and that dynamic shift raised the stakes. A soft scuffle behind him caught Hayes' attention. He turned sharply, eyes narrowing, his senses sharpening. There it was again, a faint disturbance, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably foreign. Without a word, Hayes readied his bow. He moved silently toward the sound, his instincts guiding him through the thick maze of trees. His heart beat steadily in his chest, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. He knew that any misstep would expose him. Suddenly, a blur of motion, Hayes twisted just in time, narrowly avoiding a strike from an invisible figure. His reflexes kicked in, and in one fluid motion, he notched an arrow and let it fly. The arrow connected with a solid thunk, and the faint shimmer of the alien soldier's cloaking device faltered before the body slumped to the ground. "They're here!" Hayes barked into the calm, his voice sharper now. "Move fast, take them out before they flank us." The forest erupted into chaos once more. The alien scouts, using their cloaking technology, launched a counterattack, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the dense foliage. But the hunters were ready. They adapted quickly, relying on sound and instinct rather than sight. Arrows flew, finding targets through skill rather than sensors. Mason took down another alien, his arrow striking true through the creature's chest, disrupting its cloaking field. The body shimmered into visibility as it crumpled. "Two down," he said quietly, keeping count. But despite their successes, Hayes knew this was a race against time. The aliens were regrouping, their leader's absence making them more desperate, more aggressive. Their tactics had changed. They were now targeting the hunters directly, their energy weapons crackling through the trees, scorching the bark and singeing the air. A shot narrowly missed Hayes, the heat of it brushing his skin as it struck a tree beside him, sending splinters flying. He pressed himself against the trunk, scanning the area. He had to end this quickly. The longer the fight dragged on, the more they risked losing the advantage. "Target the noise," Hayes ordered, his voice a calm command amidst the chaos. "Track their weapons' fire." His team obeyed, shifting their focus to the sounds of the aliens' energy blasts. Each time a shot was fired, it exposed their position for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. The hunters struck with precision, each arrow finding its mark with lethal accuracy. Finally, the air began to still once again. The sounds of the fight faded, leaving only the soft rustle of the forest as it reclaimed its quiet dominance. "Clear?" Hayes asked, his voice low, scanning the area once more. "Clear," came the replies one by one. Hayes exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. The ambush had been successful, but the aliens had proven more resilient than he'd anticipated. This was no longer a skirmish, it was a battle for survival, and the enemy wasn't as easily broken as he had hoped. He stepped forward, kicking aside the fallen body of an alien scout, his expression grim. Their victory here was small, but it was only the beginning. "Regroup at the rally point," he said into the calm. "We need to plan for the next wave." As his team silently gathered, Hayes looked out into the jungle, knowing that this was just the calm before the storm. And the storm was coming. The humid air clung to Captain Hayes' skin as he crouched beside his team in the dense underbrush, the weight of the jungle pressing in on them. His heart pounded steadily in his chest, but his focus remained sharp. They had regrouped, but this fight was far from over. "Status?" he whispered into his comm. Mason's voice crackled softly in response. "Holding position. No visual on the second wave, but they're out there. They're regrouping, planning something bigger," Hayes muttered. His instincts told him they were on borrowed time. The aliens had tasted defeat, but their response would be fierce. This forest had become a battleground, and both sides knew it would end soon, one way or another. He glanced around at his team. Faces streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes alert but tired. They had been fighting for hours, blending into the foliage, hunting, ambushing. Now the stakes were higher than ever. "Captain!" A voice broke through his thoughts. It was Rena, one of his most experienced hunters. She was barely visible in the shadows, but her eyes gleamed with purpose. "I found something." Hayes nodded, signaling for her to lead. They moved through the undergrowth, silent as the wind, until they reached a small clearing. There, half hidden beneath a twisted mass of vines, was a piece of alien tech, damaged but still pulsing with energy. "Is this one of their communication devices?" Hayes asked, crouching to examine it. Rena nodded. "Looks like it, but there's something else. I found traces of explosives. They're setting up traps of their own." Hayes' jaw tightened. The aliens were adapting, mirroring their tactics. They were done underestimating the humans. The jungle, once their greatest ally, was now becoming a shared weapon. The balance had shifted, and if they weren't careful, they could lose the upper hand. "Get the team ready," he said, rising to his feet. "If they want to use this place as a trap, we'll make sure it's their tomb instead." As Rena disappeared into the trees, Hayes stared at the flickering piece of alien tech. His mind raced through the possibilities. The scouts had been smart, clearly more cunning than he had anticipated, but Hayes had fought in jungles his entire life. He knew how to turn this environment into a labyrinth of death. The silence of the forest thickened, and Hayes felt a prickle at the back of his neck. He was being watched. Without turning, he spoke softly into his calm. "Mason, you see anything?" "Negative. But it's too quiet." Hayes' eyes scanned the treetops, searching for movement, for the slightest disturbance that might give away the enemy's position. Then, just at the edge of his vision, he caught it, a shimmer in the air, barely perceptible, moving through the canopy. "They're here," Hayes whispered, notching an arrow. "Stay low." The shimmer grew, spreading across the tree line like a wave. The alien cloaking technology was impressive, but it wasn't perfect. Hayes had studied it long enough to know its limitations. The slight distortion in the air, the way the leaves rustled as they passed, it was enough. Without waiting for the first shot, Hayes let his arrow fly. It struck true, and the shimmer collapsed, revealing an alien soldier crumpling from the branches. That was the signal. The jungle exploded into action. Arrows rained from above, and energy blasts lit up the shadows. The alien scouts, now exposed, fired back, but they were too slow. Hayes and his team moved like shadows, slipping between trees, using the undergrowth as cover. Every shot they fired was precise, every movement calculated. The aliens, despite their superior firepower, were disoriented. Their strategy, designed for open conflict, was falling apart in the dense, unpredictable jungle. Hayes could see their frustration. Their technology was failing them in the one place they had never expected to struggle. Hayes spotted movement to his right, another shimmer. He spun, releasing his arrow before the alien even had time to aim. The figure dropped silently, its energy weapon clattering uselessly to the forest floor. "Keep pushing," Hayes ordered, his voice firm but quiet. "Don't give them time to regroup." The hunters advanced, their arrows cutting through the air with deadly precision. The alien scouts were losing ground, their cloaking technology now more of a hindrance than an advantage. For every step they took back, Hayes' team took two forward. But even as the battle turned in their favor, Hayes couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The aliens weren't retreating, they were holding their ground, trying to buy time. But for what? Then he heard it, a low rumble beneath the earth, faint at first but growing louder. Hayes' eyes widened as realization dawned. "Fall back!" he shouted, his voice breaking through the calm. "They've rigged the ground, move!" His team scattered, leaping from the trees just as the first explosion rocked the forest. The earth erupted in a shower of dirt and debris, trees splintering under the force of the blast. Hayes hit the ground hard, rolling to avoid the falling branches, his heart pounding in his chest. The jungle, once a place of cover and concealment, was now a death trap. The aliens had turned the tables, using the very terrain the humans had relied on against them. Smoke filled the air, and the acrid smell of burning leaves stung Hayes' nose as he struggled to his feet. "Mason, Rena, report!" he barked into his calm. "We're okay, Captain," Mason replied, his voice tight. "Took some hits, but we're clear." "Rena?" Hayes called again, panic creeping into his voice when he didn't get an immediate response. "I'm here." Rena's voice finally came, shaky but alive. "That was close." Hayes exhaled in relief but quickly refocused. They had been outmaneuvered. The aliens weren't just scouts anymore, they were warriors, learning from each mistake and turning it to their advantage. "We need to fall back, regroup," Hayes said, his mind racing. The jungle had become too dangerous to hold their position. They needed a new plan, fast. The rumble of more explosions echoed in the distance, signaling that this fight was far from over. As Hayes and his team melted back into the shadows of the forest, he knew the next encounter would be even deadlier. They had drawn blood, but the enemy was evolving. And this war was only beginning. The jungle was deathly still, the once vibrant sound of birds and insects replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Captain Hayes crouched behind a fallen tree, eyes scanning the terrain ahead. The explosions had shaken the forest, leaving scorched patches where the underbrush had been torn apart. Smoke curled lazily into the canopy, casting an eerie haze over the scene. His heart thudded in his chest, but his mind remained sharp, calculating. They were down to their final moments, and both sides knew it. "They're trying to force us into a corner," Rena whispered beside him, her voice barely audible. Her face was streaked with grime, but her eyes were focused, steady. "They want to finish this," Hayes muttered. He couldn't see the enemy, but he could feel them. They were closing in, pushing his team deeper into the jungle, hurting them like prey. "We can't stay here," Mason added, his voice tight with tension. "The explosions, they're driving us towards something." Hayes knew Mason was right. The alien scouts had adapted too quickly. Their explosives had cut off key routes of escape, and now they were driving the humans toward an ambush. But Hayes wasn't about to walk into a trap. He had one last play, and it was risky, but it was all they had. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low but firm. "We're not going to let them corner us. They're trying to push us into a choke point, but we're going to turn it on them instead. They want us to retreat. Fine. We'll give them exactly what they want." Rena raised an eyebrow. "You want us to walk into their trap?" "Not walk," Hayes replied, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Run. Fast enough that they won't know what hit them." Mason shook his head. "If we miscalculate." "We won't," Hayes cut him off. "They think they've got us figured out, but they're still underestimating us. We'll split into two teams. One group will make noise, draw them out. The other will hit them from behind while they're distracted." Rena's eyes flickered with understanding. "We become the bait." "Exactly," Hayes said. "We draw them into their own trap. Use their strategy against them." Mason exhaled, his hands tightening around his bow. "We'll need perfect timing." Hayes looked between his team. They were tired, bruised, and covered in dirt, but their resolve was unbroken. If they were going down, they were taking the enemy with them. "We can do this," Hayes said. "Trust the forest. Trust each other." A few moments of silence passed as the plan settled in. Rena gave a tight nod, her fingers adjusting her gear. "Ready. On my mark," Hayes instructed, moving into position. His heart pounded, but not with fear, with determination. They weren't just hunters anymore. They were survivors. He raised his hand, signaling the start of the plan. Mason took off, leading the first team away through the undergrowth, making just enough noise to draw attention. It wasn't long before the shimmer of cloaked alien scouts appeared, moving swiftly in pursuit, their energy weapons ready. They were falling for it. Hayes stayed low, eyes trained on the shimmer, waiting for the perfect moment. He could hear the distant sound of alien footsteps, growing closer as they neared Mason's team. The tension built, the air thick with anticipation. And then, the aliens sprung the trap. They descended on the area where Mason had led them, believing they had cornered the humans. The first energy blasts illuminated the trees, sharp and deadly, but Hayes didn't flinch. He was waiting for the right signal. Suddenly, Mason's voice crackled through the calm. Now! Hayes moved like a shadow. His team, hidden in the trees behind the advancing scouts, struck with precision. Arrows flew silently through the air, each one finding its mark. Alien soldiers, caught completely off guard, dropped one by one, their cloaking fields flickering as their bodies hit the forest floor. The enemy's confusion was palpable. They had been prepared for a retreat, not an ambush. As they tried to reorganize, Hayes and his team moved through the trees like wraiths, their arrows cutting through the chaos. The jungle, once their prison, had now become their greatest weapon again. Hayes leaped from a branch, landing quietly behind an alien scout who had broken formation. Before the soldier could turn, Hayes drove his blade into the back of the alien's neck, severing its control unit. The body slumped, its invisibility tech short-circuiting. They're disoriented, Rena called through the calm. We've got them on the run! But even as they gained the upper hand, Hayes knew it wasn't over. The alien commander hadn't shown himself. Something was missing. Mason, status! Hayes barked, moving swiftly between cover. We're clear here, Mason replied. Their forces are thinning out. Wait, hold on. The calm went silent for a beat, and then Mason's voice returned, low and urgent. Captain, I've got eyes on their commander. He's headed for the high ground. Looks like he's got something big with him. Hayes cursed under his breath. Rena, flank the left side. We'll cut him off. As they moved toward the high ridge, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Hayes' instinct screamed at him that they were running out of time. Whatever the alien commander had planned, it was about to unfold. They reached the ridge just as the alien commander stepped into view. His towering figure stood against the backdrop of the jungle, a device clutched in his hand. It pulsed with a strange, glowing energy, something Hayes had never seen before. Enough games, human! The commander snarled, his voice thick with contempt. This ends now. Without hesitation, the commander activated the device. The air around them crackled with raw energy, the ground vibrating with unnatural force. Hayes gritted his teeth, forcing his body to remain still as the world seemed to shift beneath him. Stay sharp, he shouted to his team. This is it! The forest roared to life as the energy from the device surged outward, trees splintering under its force. But Hayes didn't back down. With one final breath, he drew his bow, aimed for the commander's exposed chest, and released. The arrow flew straight and true, piercing through the chaos and embedding itself deep in the alien's armor. The commander's eyes widened in shock as he staggered backward, the device slipping from his grasp. The jungle fell silent once more. Hayes lowered his bow, his breathing steady as he watched the alien commander collapse, the device flickering out. The fight was over. For now.